Welcome to a very special edition of Beyond the Cage, presented by Intimidation Clothing. Even though we are taking the week off, we still took time out of our vacation schedule to talk to you, the fans, and answer some of your burning questions in the world of mixed martial arts. So just the one round, so to speak, this week, and we will answer your fan questions that were submitted to Dave and myself via Twitter or via Facebook. Once again, I'm at Jim Graham on Twitter, and Dave is at Vigilante Juice, and our Facebook page is facebook.com/Beyond the Cage Podcast, and you can go ahead and like that right now.
And Dave is also doing this episode from the Bahamas as he is on vacation. I kid you, I'm sitting in the basement.
He's in the very famous Beyond the Cage basement of those many great Tops videos that he's done for our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Beyond the Cage Podcast. And he just did another one, and it's pretty good. Got some good cards, or good pulls, as they say in the industry. You got some good pulls. So let's go on to the fan questions that were submitted to us once again on Facebook and via Twitter. These two questions are similar in terms of what their content's about, so we're going to kind of answer them off the bat here, and they are about Invicta. The first question is from our good friend Ryan Pickup from MMAforlife.ca, and he wanted to know what our thoughts are from this past weekend's Invicta 4 event, and which bouts did we like the most, and which ones stood out or impressed us. And looking over some of the fights, Dave, that were on Invicta 4, I was really impressed with Laura Sanko, which was actually the first fight of the night. She got dominated by Cassie Robb in the first round. Then she was able to come back in round number 2 and win that fight via rear naked choke. I was really impressed with her performance and able to come back. I was also impressed with Tika Torres, as she was able to dominate Paige Van Zandt. This was only her second professional fight, and she had an incredible performance, especially in the stand-up department. Looked like a really great striker. And then, of course, the main event was great. Carla Esparza looked great, dominated Beck Hyatt for all 5 rounds. And, Hyatt was in a bad spot because she had to fill in on short notice. That's a tough fight to take against a really good fighter in Carla Esparza. So that's who impressed me, and that's what stood out from Invicta 4.
Yeah, ironically, when I saw the question, who stood out and impressed you, the first name that I wrote down was Beck Hyatt. I thought, she took the fight on 8 days' notice against a very game Carlo Esparza. Her striking was superior, but she got beat by a wrestler. I know that she does some training with our good friend Brian Ebersol, and I also know that if she continues to do some training with Brian Ebersol, that her wrestling will improve greatly. And she's definitely a woman to be reckoned with in that particular weight division. Anytime I look at fighters who come in to big-time fights and basically, survive and put on a great performance on less than a week's notice, that's pretty impressive. So I expect at Invicta 5 that Beck Hyatt should get a pretty high-profile fight.
Our next question, which also has to do with Invicta, was courtesy of Dougie D87 on Twitter. He asks us, do you believe the rumors that Zuffa are supporting Invicta financially? It would make sense as to why they don't need money. I'm not really one for conspiracy theories in sports. I'm not a really big conspiracy theory guy in general. So I don't really think Zuffa is supporting Invicta financially, and I think if they were, there would be a big deal about it, and if they were, they would have never probably started their own women's division. Why would you start your own women's division and then also support a company that's all women's MMA? That doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, so I don't think Zuffa's doing anything with Invicta.
I don't think they are. If anyone's doing it, it's what we've talked about 3 or 4 times. It's Bellator. If anyone's feeding them money, maybe Bellator or Spike, which makes the most sense because, like you said, if the UFC is feeding money to Invicta, what sense does it make to have Carlo Esparza win a title and then, hey, why don't you come on over to the UFC and just leave that title vacant over there? Like, that doesn't make any sense. But Bellator and Spike doing it makes a little bit of sense because there's only 6 or 7 girls on the roster in the women's division for Bellator. So, like I said, if anyone's doing it, it's the home of mixed martial arts, Spike TV, and Bellator.
Our next question is from our good friend David McKinney, courtesy of Twitter, and he wants to know who we think is the biggest threat to GSP at 170. And I have two guys, I guess they're tied, and they just so happen to be fighting each other at UFC 158, and that's Johnny Hendricks and Jake Ellenberger. Both these guys are huge 170s. They're both big and strong. They can knock you out with one punch, and they can dominate you with their wrestling. So these are the two guys that, if I had to come up with a blueprint of maybe how you beat GSP, these would be the guys. I really don't see Condit beating him in a rematch. I don't see Rory McDonald beating him. Josh Koscheck probably will never get a title shot again, so he's pretty much out of the picture. I don't see Nick Diaz beating him. Really, to me, the only two guys that could possibly beat GSP, at least right now, unless somebody comes up through the ranks in the next year or two, is either Hendricks or Ellenberger.
I'm going to go a little bit different than you there, Jim. I agree with Hendricks, and I think that maybe Rory McDonald might have a blueprint, just kind of knowing a little bit more about GSP. I think that he would go into a fight with a little more of an advantage than most contenders would. And then I'm going to go off the wall here. Those first two picks are what I think will happen. Let me get your opinion. What are your thoughts on Nate Marquardt? Nate Marquardt looked very good in his return to Strikeforce. He has a fight coming up this Saturday. He seems to be re-energized, I guess, after not being with Zuffa any longer. And, now he's back and, he's getting a little bit older. This might be getting towards his last run. So what do you think about Nate Marquardt?
Well, Dave, that leads us into our next question, courtesy of Brent Todd on our Facebook page. He says, if GSP gets past Diaz, who do you think he'll fight next, Nate Marquardt or Johnny Hendricks? Johnny Hendricks has to beat Jake Ellenberger, even though I think he should already have a title shot. If Hendricks loses to Ellenberger, well, it doesn't matter whether or not GSP beats Diaz, because Hendricks is not going to get a title shot. So Hendricks has to beat Ellenberger, and GSP has to beat Diaz. So if that happens, perfect. Nate Marquardt, I don't know. Again, I think if Johnny Hendricks wins, he should get the title shot. So that either leaves Nate Marquardt kind of waiting in the wings because his fight's coming up this weekend in Strikeforce, or he's going to have to take on one of those top guys like a Ellenberger, like a Diaz, maybe the winner of McDonald and Condit. He's probably going to have to fight one of those top guys, and then maybe he gets a shot, because otherwise he's going to have to wait a long time. So my short answer is Hendricks. Long answer, maybe Marquardt.
I'm cool with Marquardt coming over and taking a fight against one of those winners. Just for A, he doesn't sit around, and B, if you beat, he comes in and beats a Condit or a McDonald, it just proves what we're saying, that, he deserves a title shot.
Our next question comes courtesy of Twitter from our good friend Sean Smith, and he knows how we love the flyweight division, Dave, so he asked, where do you see the flyweight division going in 2013? What are some talents people should watch out for in the UFC that could threaten either John Dodson or Demetrius Muddy Mouse Johnson? And we are big fans of the flyweight division. We think it's the most dynamic division in sports, and I think there should be a flyweight fight on every UFC card. With that said, the guys to look out for me, John Moraga may be kind of obvious because we think he could possibly get a title shot. Two guys that maybe people don't know about that I would really urge them to watch would be John Lineker, who beat Yasuhiro Urshitani a couple weeks ago. He's a guy to look out for. I think he has a lot of potential. And a guy that we have just outside the top 10, Dave, is Tim Elliott, who made his first ever fight in the UFC against John Dodson. I actually thought had a great performance against Dodson in a 3-round fight. And I think he's a guy that can compete with the top talent in this division. He's just really one big win away from being in the top 10, and that's why we kind of have him outside. But I would say Tim Elliott, John Lineker, and then maybe the obvious one of being John Moraga. And I think the flyweight division will start to grow this year. Last year was kind of the first year of it. They only have a couple guys now, but I think now that there is some top talent, there is some good fighters, we're going to see guys that are coming over from that Taipachi Palace that folded. We're going to see some of the top talent from that organization come into the UFC, and I think we're going to probably still see more guys from the 35 division drop down, which will only help the flyweight division. So that's where I see it going this year.
I hope to see a ton more. I'm pretty excited I get to see the flyweight title fight in Chicago in a couple weeks. hopefully I'll be able to see him from where I'm sitting, but they'll be moving so fast. But looking at our list that's on Facebook, on our Facebook page under the notes section, we've got our January rankings. Looking at the list, just scrolling down real quick, the first name that pops out that it is interesting to me that you didn't mention is Louis Godinot, the young man with the green wavy locks. He's an entertaining fighter. He's exciting when he's in there, and he comes to fight every time. So that's somebody to keep an eye on. I'm not even sure if he's got a fight scheduled. I thought I remember him being on injury, but that's somebody that you could keep an eye on in 2013 that Jim didn't mention since he wanted to name everybody within the division. Anyway, I digress.
All right, our next question comes courtesy of Facebook from Hector Quintero, and he says, with Strikeforce closing, which fighters will have the largest impact in 2013? Looking beyond not only Marquardt and the other Strikeforce champions, a guy that I think will do pretty well is Jacare Souza. I mean, the guy has world-class jiu-jitsu, and he's showing improving stand-up with each and every fight inside the Strikeforce brand. And if he takes out Ed Herman, who I know is not, a top-of-the-line middleweight, but he still is a guy that has a pretty solid record in the UFC and is a very tough fighter in his own right. If he gets by Ed Herman, I think a lot of people will start to look at Jacare maybe in a little different light, and I think he's a guy that could beat just about anyone in the UFC's middleweight division. I think he's that talented, and I think Jacare would be my pick for a guy from Strikeforce that would move over to the UFC and have a big 2013.
When I saw the question, I tried to go a little bit of the other direction. When we watched those fights at Rousey and Tate last year, there were some good fights on the undercard, and I'm anxious to see, like friend of the show, Layamba Sayers. I'm interested to see if he comes over when he gets into the UFC and kind of gets into that middle tier of guys within his division. I'm anxious to see how that middle tier of guys in the UFC matches up with those guys that are coming over from Strikeforce. Because all we've ever heard is how, the UFC is inferior to Strikeforce, blah, blah, blah. So that those Strikeforce guys that do come over are going to be maybe have a chip on their shoulder to try to prove that it's definitely worth, you should have brought me here a lot sooner. So I'm anxious to see kind of like that middle tier of guys, such as like Lamamba Sayers, just to kind of see what they do when they get to the big time.
Our next question comes courtesy of Facebook, and it's from Aaron J. He asks, who at each weight class above would benefit most from dropping? For example, from light heavyweight to middleweight, Rashad would benefit from dropping down. Also at that weight class, I think Lyoto Machida would be an interesting guy, maybe dropping down to middleweight. I think that would be interesting. And then looking at Bellator, I think Zach Makovsky, who just got released, I think he would be a tremendous talent at 125. And also, I think Alexander Volkov, their heavyweight champion, would be an absolute monster at light heavyweight. And then he also asked vice versa, who would benefit maybe from moving up. And I couldn't really think of anybody because normally when I'm thinking of guys moving weight classes, I'm always thinking down. I really never think about a guy moving up a weight class. I never really think that's a great idea in most cases, but the only guy I could maybe think of moving up would be John Jones, just because he seems to be dominating everybody at light heavyweight. It would be interesting to see him at heavyweight and see if he could compete with some of those guys. So I would maybe say John Jones moving up, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think from the heavyweight division moving down, I totally agree with the Volkov. I think even, I know he doesn't want to, but I like Bellator contender Rich Hale if he moved down. I also think Pat Barry would benefit from moving down. I already know somebody like Clay Guida's dropping to 45. I'm anxious to see my guy Ebersol is going from 170 to 155. That's going to be an absolute huge 155. The dropping down thing is crazy because some of these guys are just sick at their current weight classes, and then you're going to drop 10 pounds and be that much faster. As for going up, geez, I couldn't even wager a guess. Other than somebody like a John Jones, who's just running through. I mean, if Anderson's going to stick around, maybe Anderson throw on some weight and get to 205. I don't know. I apologize to Aaron. I really don't know anybody going up.
Yeah, it's a lot harder to think of people moving up, but let's move on to our next question, also on Facebook. It's from Wes Rusin, and he asks, why is everyone making a big deal of Rousey being given a belt considering they did the same for Jose Aldo? And they also did the same for Dominic Cruz of the bantamweight division, and I don't know. I don't know why people would really complain about that. I mean, she was the Strikeforce champion. They absorbed that division. They're basically assuming that division. She was the champion there, so they make her the UFC champ. They did the same thing with the WEC weight classes, so I don't really know why people would make a big deal about it. It seems relatively standard, and it really seems like okay move by me.
Because she's a chick. That's why people are upset. I don't understand. If you go and read one of our associate sites, one of our sponsors actually, VigilanteMMA.com, they wrote an article about everybody complaining that the rumor was that Rousey was making 75 to show and 75 to win. That rumor was false, but everybody's making a big deal about it. Who cares? It's a belt. Does anybody else have a right to that belt? Is anybody else the women's champ anywhere in the world in that division that deserves that belt? No. I guess I wish that Wes was here, or some of these haters that are hating on it. Would you rather her fight somebody like Liz Carmouche and then give her the belt? I mean, would you tune in to watch a fight from two women? I would say most people don't know that much about Liz Carmouche. They don't know her resume, I guess you'd say. Would that sell? That, hey, two girls are fighting for the belt. I don't know if that would sell. It's a little easier to sell when you have the world champion Ronda Rousey. I mean, when she does her media, it's a lot bigger of a deal.
And our last question is from our good friend Gabe Keefe from MMAFreak.com, and he asked us on Twitter, why do people not consider Alexander Gustafsson ready for a title shot when Sonnen and Vitor Belfort have got one? And I really don't know why people don't consider him one of the top guys, because I believe, Dave, if I can speak for you here a little bit, we both believe Gustafsson should get the next title shot at 205 pounds once Chael Sonnen and John Jones do their business. Now, I know there's some other factors, but I consider, and Dave considers, Gustafsson ready to go. Other people, I think, maybe wouldn't consider him because he's Swedish. I know that maybe sound like a cop-out, but I think there is this stigma of European fighters just not being as talented as guys over here in North America, whether they're American or they're Canadian. And I just think that people kind of like brush them off like, meh, European fighters, they're not that good, considering there's never been a European champion. So I think a lot of people dismiss European fighters, and that's really a shame because Gustafsson's maybe the best fighter in UFC history from Europe.
I will implore everyone to take a look at our light heavyweight rankings. Go ahead and stop me. I'm going to go from 1 to 10. Stop me when I get to a title, to somebody who you think should fight for the light heavyweight title. Okay? Ready, go. John Jones is 1. Dan Henderson 2. Rashad Evans 3. Lyoto Machida 4. Phil Davis 5. Alexander Gustafsson 6.
Nailed it, Dave, right there. Alexander Gustafsson 6. Now, I know Dan Henderson, and some people may be mad when they hear this. Dan Henderson was supposed to get a title shot, but the UFC didn't like how he pulled out of UFC 151, causing the cancellation 8 days before the fight. So they gave him a fight with Machida. So the reason I had you stop at Gustafsson is because, to me, Machida has to fight Henderson. The winner of that will then get a title shot. So we're still one fight away from either of those two gentlemen. And Rashad Evans just lost to John Jones not too long ago and has not fought since that loss. And he's supposed to be taking on Little Nog coming up, who is at number 9 on our list. So conceivably, it's going to be at least 1, if not 2 fights before we see Evans get back in the deal. And of course, there's this whole stupid Ultimate Fighter thing with Chael Sonnen moving up to get a title shot that really kind of puts the division on hold. So while we think Gustafsson should get the next shot, if he doesn't feel like waiting till, what do you think, maybe August before he would fight again, Dave? Conceivably, since Sonnen Jones is in April?
Yeah, and I mean, every time Jones fights, he always seems to have a foot issue, an elbow issue, so maybe even longer.
So we're looking at least 8 months, and he fought, like a month ago? So he's going to have to wait at least 9 months before the actual day of the fight. If he doesn't want to wait 9 months, then maybe he rematches Phil Davis. Maybe he takes on Ryan Bader. Maybe he takes on a Glover Teixeira. I don't know. But as of right now, I think he should have a title shot. Well, that about does it for our fan questions. Dave and I appreciate you guys going onto Twitter and going onto Facebook and asking us some questions. We're going to try to do this hopefully maybe every month or maybe every other month to try to get your fans' questions. And anytime you have a question, whether we're doing an official thing like this or not, go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/BeyondTheCagePodcast, or hit us up on Twitter, ask us your questions, or email us at BeyondTheCagePodcast@yahoo.com. For Dave Sadler, I am Jim Graham. Thanks for asking questions and hope you liked our answers. And thanks for listening to Beyond the Cage, brought to you by Intimidation Clothing.